pilot demands black woman prove she owns the jet, her husband's call gets him fired instantly. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on someone else's assumptions? Huntsman asks. I nod. The mustache on my face held me up with some resistance. Today we will dive into an extraordinary and dramatic story of a black woman, how she remained poised and resilient when confronted by blatant discrimination, and how a single phone call to her husband turned the tables in the most dramatic way possible. Her triumph wasn't just personal. It became a symbol of fighting for respect in spaces where it is often denied. But before we dive into the details, listen, where are you watching from? Have you ever faced a moment where someone underestimated you? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you love hearing real-life stories of resilience, courage, and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales like Sarah's. Your support helps us continue bringing these impactful stories to a wider audience. Now, let's begin this journey of courage, determination, and justice. Stay with us until the end, because this story is one you won't want to miss. Sarah Johnson was a woman of vision and determination. As the founder of a successful fashion brand celebrated for its authenticity and inclusivity, Sarah had built her business from the ground up. Now she stood on the verge of her biggest milestone yet, a critical negotiation to expand her brand into Europe. This deal wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a chance to elevate her brand to the global stage, proving that her unique vision could resonate far beyond her home country. That late afternoon, Sarah stepped out of a sleek black sedan at a private airstrip, her presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in an elegant white blazer paired with tailored trousers, her silk scarf flowed softly in the breeze, and her natural curls framed her face with quiet confidence. The polished silver jet waiting on the tarmac glistened under the sun, symbolizing her years of hard work and perseverance. Yes, indeed. The private lounge was quiet and luxurious, exuding exclusivity with its minimalist decor and attentive staff. As Sarah entered, her heels clicked against the marble floors, turning heads. Some offered polite smiles, others glanced at her with thinly veiled curiosity, as though silently assessing whether she belonged in such a space. It wasn't unfamiliar territory for Sarah. She'd navigated these moments many times before. She had learned to rise above the silent judgments, letting her confidence speak louder than words. At the check-in desk, a uniformed attendant greeted Sarah with professional politeness. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your identification and reservation details, please?" No answer. Sarah handed over her documents, her warm smile masking the faint tension she felt in these settings. "Sarah Johnson, Flight 781 to Paris," she said with ease. After a brief pause, the attendant returned her documents with a respectful nod. "Everything is in order, Ms. Johnson. Your jet is ready for departure." Sarah thanked the woman and made her way toward the jet, her heels tapping rhythmically on the pavement. Yet, as she approached the aircraft, a figure emerged from its shadow, his posture rigid and his expression unreadable. It was the pilot, Captain David Henderson. The unease began to creep in as his eyes scanned her up and down, his demeanor more scrutinizing than welcoming. As she reached the staircase leading to the jet, he stepped in front of her, blocking her way. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Can I help you?" She leaned forward slightly. In that moment, Sarah's confidence remained intact, but the tension was undeniable. What should have been a seamless departure was about to take an unexpected and deeply troubling turn. As Sarah Johnson approached the staircase leading to the jet, Captain David Henderson stepped into view. His crisp uniform and rigid posture exuded authority, but his sharp gaze told a different story. He eyed Sarah with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief, as though her very presence at the airstrip was an anomaly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his tone cold and clipped. "Can I help you?" She smiled. Sarah stopped mid-step, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yes, I'm Sarah Johnson. This is my flight. Everything should already be in order," said Pearl. She stood to assist the woman, as Martin finally managed to get upright. The captain's eyes narrowed further, scanning her from head to toe. "Your flight?" he repeated, his voice tinged with incredulity. His smirk hinted at a disbelief that felt personal, as though he had already decided she couldn't possibly belong here. "Yes," Sarah replied firmly, her tone even. She handed over her reservation details again, holding her composure despite the growing tension. Henderson glanced briefly at the papers, then let out a dry chuckle. "Anyone could print something like this," he said dismissively. "I'll need proper proof from the account holder, or someone higher up before I let you board." Sarah's lips tightened. She had anticipated the occasional stare or murmured comment, but this was different. This was blatant and brazen. "Isn't that what these documents are for?" she asked calmly, though her voice carried an unmistakable edge. "They verify everything you need," she said. Henderson shook his head, the smirk returning to his face. "Security protocols," he said curtly. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to board without further verification." Sarah drew in a slow, steadying breath. Years of navigating professional spaces where her presence was questioned had taught her to stay composed under pressure. She squared her shoulders and met Henderson's gaze head-on. Henderson shook his head. "Still underwater, Sarah," Henderson said by way of administrative procedure. "Captain Henderson," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "I suggest you check again. I've met all the requirements and followed every necessary protocol. I don't believe there's anything further to discuss." But Henderson wasn't budging. "I'm suggesting you step aside until this is sorted," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Henderson sighed. The sting of his words was sharp. It wasn't just about her documentation. It was about her. Her appearance, her skin, her very existence in this space were all under scrutiny. This wasn't the first time Sarah had faced such prejudice, but it didn't make the experience any less infuriating. Nanya never once mentioned having to stand around others in that place. She'd said, "I'm the COO," and those words alone held power to push her off. Sarah refused to let her irritation show. "Very well," she said, pulling her phone from her bag. "If you won't take my word for it, perhaps you'll listen to my husband." Sarah finally said. The captain's smirk deepened, his confidence almost amusing. He stepped back, arms crossed, as though he had won some unspoken battle. Sarah dialed her husband Jonathan, who answered on the first ring. "Sarah," he said warmly. "Is everything okay?" She exhaled slowly, keeping her voice steady. "Not exactly. There's an issue with the pilot. He's refusing to let me board." "And why is that?" Jonathan's tone shifted instantly, the warmth replaced by concern. "What kind of issue?" Sarah glanced at Henderson, whose smug expression hadn't wavered. "He's questioning my ownership of the flight, despite my having all the necessary documentation." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Jonathan's firm response. "I'll handle it. Stay where you are." Sarah ended the call and slipped her phone back into her bag with deliberate care. She turned to Henderson, her composure unwavering. Shooting the security guard with an arrow seemed like the right thing to do. Henderson smiled. "We are far from unwavering. My husband will be here shortly," she said evenly. "You'll have your proper proof." The minutes that followed were quiet but tense. Sarah stood near the staircase, her posture poised, while Henderson lingered nearby, arms crossed, his smirk still intact. When a sleek black SUV pulled up to the tarmac moments later, both Sarah and Henderson turned toward it. Jonathan stepped out, his tailored suit catching the sunlight, his expression calm yet authoritative. He approached Henderson with measured steps, his gaze fixed on the pilot. "Captain Henderson, is it?" "Yes," the captain replied stiffly. Jonathan's voice was cold enough to make the tarmac seem even cooler. "Would you care to explain why my wife, an established client of this company, is being denied access to her flight?" said. Henderson's smugness faltered, replaced by visible discomfort. He stammered, attempting to explain, but Jonathan cut him off. I don't need excuses, Jonathan said sharply. What I need is accountability. You've questioned her legitimacy based on assumptions that have no place in a professional setting. That ends now. Margaret. Henderson's face reddened, but he said nothing, realizing the gravity of the situation. Jonathan turned to Sarah, his expression softening. Are you ready to board? More than ready, she replied with a faint smile. As they ascended the staircase together, Henderson stood frozen on the tarmac, his earlier confidence shattered. This wasn't just about proving ownership of a jet. It was about challenging the deeply ingrained prejudices that allowed such behavior to persist. For Sarah, the confrontation was far from over. But this moment, small as it seemed, was a victory. It was proof that respect is not optional, it's a requirement. As Sarah Johnson stepped away from Captain Henderson, she pulled out her phone, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her shoulders. The calm, composed exterior she maintained didn't betray the simmering frustration within. When her husband Jonathan answered, his warm and steady voice provided an immediate sense of relief. "Sarah, is everything all right?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. "Not exactly," she replied, her voice measured but firm. "I'm at the airstrip and there's an issue with the pilot. He's refusing to let me board the jet, claiming I need additional proof of ownership, even though I've shown him all the documentation." Marino watched her go and then picked up the storage inventory from the table. Jonathan's tone shifted instantly, the concern replaced with resolute determination. "What's his name?" "Captain David Henderson," Sarah answered, glancing toward the pilot, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a faint smirk still lingering on his face. "I'll be there shortly," Jonathan said without hesitation. "Stay calm. I'll handle it." Sarah ended the call and tucked her phone away. Her gaze met Henderson's as she spoke evenly. "My husband will be here soon. You'll get all the confirmation you need." Henderson's smug expression didn't waver, as if he was confident this moment would still end in his favor. Sarah, however, remained poised, refusing to let his demeanor unnerve her. Minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the tarmac, its polished exterior gleaming under the sun. The door opened, and Jonathan Harper stepped out, his presence commanding attention immediately. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, his every movement exuded authority and confidence. As he approached, the air seemed to shift. His gaze locked onto Henderson, whose stance subtly stiffened under the weight of Jonathan's calm, yet piercing scrutiny. "Is that all you know?" Stevens demanded. Henderson spoke in a smooth, controlled tone. "Captain Henderson, I presume," Jonathan began, his tone cool but sharp. "That's correct," Henderson replied, his voice less certain than before. Jonathan didn't waste time. "I understand you've refused my wife access to this flight, despite her having a confirmed reservation and all necessary documentation. Would you care to explain why?" Henderson hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the direct question. "Well, sir, there were some discrepancies in the paperwork. I was following protocol." Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone growing colder. "Discrepancies? Or assumptions? Because from where I stand, it appears you've chosen to question her legitimacy based on nothing but your own bias." Silence filled the break. "Sir, Henderson began, but Jonathan raised a hand, silencing him. "Spare me the excuses," Jonathan said sharply. "This isn't about protocol. It's about professionalism, or in your case, the lack thereof. My wife has been subjected to humiliation because you decided to impose standards that were neither reasonable nor justified." Henderson's confidence wavered, his earlier smugness replaced by visible discomfort. His gaze shifted to the tarmac, unable to meet Jonathan's piercing eyes. "Let me make this clear," Jonathan continued, his voice steady but unyielding. "You've insulted a loyal client of this company and tarnished its reputation with your behavior. This kind of arrogance and prejudice will not be tolerated." The gathered staff nearby watched in silence, the tension palpable. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that his actions were under heavy scrutiny. Just then Lisa, the station manager, hurried onto the scene. Her expression was a mixture of nervousness and urgency as she approached Jonathan. "Jonathan." "Mr. Harper," she began, her voice faltering slightly, I was just made aware of the situation. I sincerely apologize for what's happened here. This does not reflect our company's values." Jonathan turned to her, his gaze softening slightly but still firm. "Lisa, as the station manager, you are responsible for ensuring your staff adheres to the highest standards of professionalism. Clearly, that has not happened today." Lisa nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, sir. I'll be filing a full report to corporate immediately, and I'll personally ensure this is addressed." Savannah glanced at Lisa. Jonathan's focus returned to Henderson, who stood silently, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Captain Henderson," Jonathan said, his tone final. "You've shown through your actions that you are unfit to represent this company. I trust Lisa will ensure the appropriate disciplinary actions are taken. I'll be following up with corporate myself to ensure accountability." Henderson's jaw tightened, but he didn't protest. He knew his fate was sealed. Jonathan turned back to Sarah, his expression softening. "Are you ready to board, Miss?" She smiled faintly, nodding. Jonathan extended his arm, and Sarah took it as they ascended the staircase to the jet. Henderson remained on the tarmac, his earlier confidence shattered. But for Sarah, the resolution was bittersweet. While the confrontation had exposed the prejudice she'd faced, it was also a victory, a reminder that standing firm against injustice could create real consequences for those perpetuating it. Both men were glued to the television as the plane flew up to the Williamsburg fence line. As the jet ascended into the sky, Sarah looked out at the clouds, reflecting on the events of the day. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a statement. Respect wasn't optional, it was a requirement. And together with Jonathan, she had made that abundantly clear. "Then when, boss," Sarah said to Jonathan, "let's begin with what we have." As the jet ascended into the clear blue sky, Sarah Johnson leaned back in her seat, the hum of the engines a soothing backdrop to her racing thoughts. She stared out the window at the vast expanse of clouds, reflecting on the confrontation that had just unfolded. The weight of the day lingered, but so did a quiet pride. Jonathan sat beside her, his presence a steadying force. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "You better go ahead then," he said, fiercely accusing in his soft voice. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice hinted at the emotional toll. After a pause, she added, "It's just exhausting, always having to prove myself. No matter how hard I work, how much I achieve, it's like I still don't belong in certain spaces." Jonathan sighed, his expression thoughtful. "I know," he said quietly. "It's something we've both faced, but it doesn't make it any easier. The system is designed to make us question ourselves. But today, you didn't just stand your ground. You made a statement." She turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "And you handled it beautifully. I couldn't have done it without you." Jonathan chuckled softly. "You didn't need me to. You were already handling it. I just made sure they knew who they were dealing with." They shared a quiet moment, their hands entwined. For Sarah, the flight wasn't just a journey to Paris. It was a moment to reclaim her power, a reminder that resilience was her greatest strength. The next morning, the city of Paris was alive with energy. Sarah and Jonathan arrived at the headquarters of the European conglomerate, a towering modern structure of steel and glass. Inside, the boardroom was sleek and professional, filled with high-ranking executives who eyed Sarah with a mix of curiosity and respect. As she stepped forward to begin her presentation, Sarah felt a surge of determination. This pitch was more than just a business opportunity. It was her chance to prove that her vision for inclusive, authentic fashion could resonate on a global scale. When she reached the edge of the stage, Lara's voice began, moving across the scenario. She began with confidence, her voice steady and deliberate. Her presentation highlighted her brand's unique appeal, its dedication to diversity, the growing demand for authentic representation in fashion, and the untapped potential in European markets. Each point was backed by data, market trends, and compelling visuals. The room was silent, the executives captivated by her professionalism and vision. When she concluded, she looked directly at the CEO, Elena Russo, whose thoughtful expression betrayed a flicker of admiration. "This is more than just a business expansion," Sarah said, her tone unwavering. "It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen, valued, and represented. That's the future of fashion, and that's what we're bringing to Europe." Elena leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Your passion is evident," she said, "and your strategy is sound. I believe this could be the start of something remarkable." The murmurs of agreement around the table signaled her success. Moments later, Elena extended her hand, sealing the deal. That evening, Sarah and Jonathan stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, overlooking the glittering lights of Paris. The Eiffel Tower loomed in the distance, its golden glow a symbol of triumph. Sarah sipped her wine, her thoughts drifting between the events of the past 24 hours. "It feels like more than a business win," she said quietly. "It's like validation. For me, for the work I've done, for the battles I've fought just to be here." Jonathan nodded, his gaze soft as he watched her. "It is more than that. What you did today wasn't just about the pitch. It was about proving that no matter the obstacles, you belong in those rooms." Sarah smiled, a mixture of pride and humility. "You know, I wasn't trying to make a statement yesterday. I just wanted to board my plane and get to Paris. But somehow, it became so much bigger than that." The Colonel shrugged, as if to say whatever, assumed she meant to be funny. Another silly moment. Jonathan chuckled, "Because it is bigger than that. Every small victory chips away at something much larger." "Yes," she said, focusing on the ridiculous feat he was gesturing at. The concerned personal trainer profile was life-changing. Jonathan snorted in disagreement, but did not let it cross his face. As they raised their glasses to toast the day's success, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond business. She wasn't just expanding her brand. She was breaking barriers and challenging perceptions. Later that night, at a celebratory dinner hosted by the conglomerate, Elena stood to give a toast. She spoke of resilience, innovation, and the power of diversity. When she mentioned Sarah by name, the room erupted in applause. Her grandmother had never had an attack of conscience, and later accepted that Sarah had been her sibling. For Sarah, the applause wasn't just a recognition of her work, it was a celebration of every moment she had refused to back down, of every instance where she had proved that respect wasn't optional. As the night drew to a close, Sarah stood in front of the Eiffel Tower with Jonathan by her side. He handed her a small gift, a silver lock engraved with their initials and the date. "To the bridge," he said with a smile, "a reminder of how far you've come." Tears pricked her eyes as she looked at him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jonathan took her hand, his gaze steady. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. And Sarah knew he was right. Her journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The ripple effects of Sarah Johnson's experience at the airstrip were immediate and far-reaching. By the time she and Jonathan landed in Paris, the incident had already started making waves online. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the blatant discrimination Sarah faced, and the poised yet decisive way she and Jonathan addressed it. Social media buzzed with discussions about systemic biases in elite spaces, how assumptions and prejudice often go unchecked in industries that pride themselves on exclusivity. Supposedly, he'd taken a woman back to the airport and brought her home to her apartment. Within days, the story had sparked a broader conversation about accountability in professional settings, with many sharing their own experiences of being underestimated or scrutinized unfairly. For some, Sarah's story was a painful reminder of the barriers they faced daily. For others, it was an eye-opening revelation of privileges they hadn't questioned. Through it all, Sarah remained focused and reflective. Sitting in her Paris hotel suite, she spoke candidly about the challenges she'd encountered not just on the tarmac, but throughout her journey as a black woman navigating predominantly white, male-dominated industries. "It's exhausting," she admitted. "Always having to prove yourself, always being held to a higher standard just to be seen as equal. But it's also what fuels me. Every moment like this reminds me why I do what I do, to challenge these biases, to create spaces where people like me aren't the exception, but the norm." Jonathan, ever her steadfast supporter, added, "This wasn't just about a jet or a business pitch. It was about standing firm in the face of prejudice and refusing to let it define you." For Sarah, the incident was a painful but necessary reminder of the work still ahead. It was proof that even in moments of success, the fight for respect and equality was far from over. But it also reinforced her belief in resilience, that every small victory chipped away at the larger system of inequality. As Sarah's story continued to gain traction, she began receiving messages from people around the world, women, minorities, and allies alike, thanking her for her strength and courage. To Sarah, it was humbling. She hadn't set out to make a statement that day, but in standing her ground, she had inspired others to do the same. She cried. To the audience, Sarah's story offers an invaluable lesson. Prejudice thrives in silence, and challenging it takes courage. Whether it's speaking up in a moment of injustice or simply refusing to accept the status quo, every act of resistance matters. Respect isn't optional, it's a right. And as Sarah proved, standing firm against prejudice isn't just about personal victory. It's about paving the way for meaningful change. It's one of Sarah's favorite quotes of mine. Sarah Johnson's story is more than just an inspiring moment of personal triumph. It's a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of standing up against prejudice. Her experience at the airstrip wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of systemic biases that so many face every day. But Sarah didn't let the weight of those challenges deter her. Instead, she turned them into fuel to drive her success and pave the way for others. As Sarah continues to grow her business and make her mark on the global stage, she remains committed to challenging the biases that tried to hold her back. Her journey is a reminder that breaking barriers isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Families first, safety second. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand your ground against assumptions or prejudice? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter, and they can inspire others to keep pushing forward, just like Sarah did. Sarah wrote to Captain Butler and received the following direction to the pilot when she reached Port Avery, Springfield. Sarah wrote, "When I got pushed off a plane while getting off the plane too loudly, If you found Sarah's story empowering, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories of courage, resilience, and justice. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey with us. Let's continue to challenge assumptions, celebrate victories, and fight for a world where respect and equality are not just ideals, but realities. We'll see you in the next story. Stay inspired and take care.